people like you and hold them with such bizarre and perverted things going on all around you?
Well, I feel a little bit comfort in the fact that many politicians in this country were seduced by Jim Jones and thought he was a very wonderful person, too. The difference between them and the people in the church was the fact that they got gradually caught up into something that became more violent as weeks went by, and there was the fear that if you left the group that you would be killed. Can you stop this? I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought.
Cobb, and he destroyed the massive suicide that they killed all the
Al,
kids.
how is it that
My brothers and sisters.
that Jones could attract people and hold them through all of this bizarre and
And I
really
won't know
perverted
until my brother
things?
comes back because.
Well, like it's been mentioned before by others in the group, Jim Jones started out as presenting a picture of a very loving congregation, very concerned about children's programs, senior citizens' homes, activities for the children, influencing legislation for civil rights, trying to get politicians in government that would be helpful in changing the society so it wouldn't be so bad. We all recognize that there were definite problems in our particular system, where there are so many people that do without, and some have very much the advantage here. I myself had marched with Martin Luther King in Selma, Alabama. I had been involved in civil rights movements all my life. So this was probably my rallying point around a leader who seemed to be able to have a lot of strength, a lot of followers, and a lot of clout. But it was so difficult to get out of the group once you got in, because gradually you realized you'd been sucked into a situation where if you left, that you were a traitor, and he had vowed to have all traitors killed. If any. Why?
You look
Tired.
No, you don't. You look cheerful. You want a cup of coffee or something?
Not right now. I've had 4 hours sleep in the last 2 nights.
Get some sleep. Okay. Al, how is it that? What is it about the People's Temple? What is it about the Reverend Jones that he was able to attract so many people and hold them through all these bizarre and perverted happenings that you saw and everybody else talks about?
Well, aside from the fact that people came into People's Temple for various reasons, healings, political views, or just the general loving atmosphere of the church, what kept them into the group once they found something that they liked was the fear of retaliation if they left. Jones was always telling the congregation, and particularly the Planning Commission, that if there are any defectors, if anything happens to me or People's Temple, that the first thing to do is go after the traitors, then kidnap politicians if I'm in jail and hold them for ransom. As things got bad gradually, first they started whippings with a belt for a few whacks, and for minor infractions such as drinking and smoking or being late for work. But they gradually got to where they wanted to switch. Then they had people undress and go into the pool, jump into the pool in their underclothes. One man happened not to have any underclothes, so he made him strip down anyway and had to walk naked back to the pool and jump in. Then they went to the board, which was about 2.5 inches wide, about 4 feet long, about 3 feet long, and about 3/4 inch thick. And they started off with maybe 25, and then the beatings got up to, the most I can remember is 150. My daughter received 75 whacks with this board, and when she went to school and dressed down for gym, the girl said her butt looked like hamburger. The first whack brought out excruciating screams from everyone. Then the fact that the church had many functions, there were people.
Did you ever witness any of these beatings?
I witnessed hundreds of beatings. I might even go as far as to say 1,000.
Didn't you want to stop it? Didn't you want to do something?
Yes, at the end, that's what caused me to leave, was because he was becoming so sadistic in his beatings, to the point where you could even hear him laughing, giggling under his voice over the loudspeaker when people were being beaten, or while senior citizens were up there boxing one another. They had some senior citizens box a retarded girl for having made a racist statement, and she would fall down, and they'd pick her up, and she was bleeding, and then the counselors would hold her up while they could still beat on her. It was so sadistic and we knew the dangers of leaving, so we talked about it for some time before we actually made the decision to leave. And in making a decision to leave People's Temple, you have to decide you'd rather die than go back,
Why is that?
because they threatened to kill all traitors. When we left, we had all kinds of threatening phone calls, threatening letters, all of which had been turned over to the authorities. They broke into my house using my daughter, who was still in the church a year after we were in, because the people who lived upstairs from where we were living knew she was my daughter. She just said she forgot the key and was going to have to break in a window, and they unloaded loads of stuff, some very incriminating stuff against People's Temple that I accidentally came across. But I also had all the pictures of People's Temple. I was a photographer. I had all the picture files, all the membership files, and we had planned to give those back to them, but we wanted some kind of an agreement with them before we did give it back for our safety. We did manage to maintain quite a bit of stuff so that we do have a lot of security.
Did you ever at any time try to get any authorities to investigate the People's Church? Did you warn them about these things? If so, what did you do?
Well, at first we were afraid to go to any authorities because Jones had the politics tied up so much in Redwood Valley, Ukiah. He elected the sheriff, the police chief, and the same thing happened in San Francisco. He's very responsible in the election of the political officials there, Mayor Moscone and the likes. But my wife and I thought for a long time, who could we possibly get to help us, We wrote a letter to Ralph Nader, not trusting him, but thinking maybe he could help us. We signed the letter, gave him so much information, and said, if you want to hear more, put an ad in the Chronicle to Angela, and how for Angela to contact them. Well, he sent the letter back to the district attorney's office, and Tim Stone was in the district attorney's office. The district attorney said, well, here's something about People's Temple. You want to take care of this? And Tim Stone naturally being a devoted follower of Jones at the time, took the letter back to Jim Jones. So nothing ever came of it. There was no investigation at all. I gave all the threatening letters to the Treasury Department. They fingerprinted it. I later was interviewed by the San Francisco District Attorney's Office, and they seemed willing to take all the information from many of us, but I pointed out that there were fingerprints on one of those letters that we had received. And to this day, I have not been asked who I thought those fingerprints might be of, who the possibilities were.
When did you do all this? When did you go to the Treasury? When did you go to the San Francisco Police? When did they interview you?
Oh, probably about 2 years ago, we told the Treasury Department that they were shipping arms to Guyana. They said that they would keep an eye on it, but obviously either they're not telling or they didn't find anything. We knew that they were taking large sums of money down. There was no way they could check even an airplane list until after it had taken off to know who was on the plane. So I understand that the government having their own limitations because of the legal ramifications. But it was extremely difficult. It was only until New West started a story that we felt maybe someone had the courage to stand up against People's Temple, Jim Jones. We called these reporters, not giving them our real names at first, and telling them some of the things that happened, and they begged us to come out. They said, as long as you remain unidentified, people are still going to be beaten in the church. Children are going to be beaten. Only until somebody stands up will it ever get out. So we decided that we would rather die than see this go on. So we did come out publicly at that time.
What did you? How did the ceding of all your property take place? What did you do, and why?
My wife and I had 19. We quit for a few months back in 1960, I believe. About 6 to 8 months after we joined the church, because it began to get a little bit extremely restrictive. They wanted to know every move you made, and so we. I had just gotten my retirement check from Standard Oil, so I put it into this property in Willits, plus a deed I'd had on another property. And we figured that we could retire after it was paid off, because I was getting up in years. I had already worked 19 years at Standard Oil, and it was becoming more difficult to get a job at my age. So the children begged us to come back into the church, and he kept pleading with the children. He'd call us on the phone saying, I haven't told anybody you've left the church. I told him you were on a mission. He had all kinds of ways of getting to you, And so we finally decided, well, we weren't doing anything to help the world change by being out of the church, and at least the people in there were making an effort to make this a better world to live in. So we did go back. They then told us that they were going to send us as missionaries to Africa, and that we would need to sign over our property to the church so that they would be able to handle it, give them a power of attorney. So we thought that made sense, and they said, we may all be coming over there with you, and we will have to dispose of the property. Well, we prepared for this trip and came down to the library, studied Africa. Then they decided that Africa was a bad place to go about 1 or 2 days before we were ready to take off on the plane. You're going to Peru. So we came down and studied to go to Peru. And it wasn't until sometime later that we realized that this whole thing was just a means of getting us to turn over our property to the church.
And you turned it all over?
And we did turn it all over.
19 houses?
Yeah, 19 houses and 2 houses in Redwood Valley.
Just one last question. Did you ever see anyone close to you get administered one of these beatings or some of these cruel tortures that you've been talking about? And if so, were you inclined to do anything? Did you want to do anything?
Yeah, when they really got brutal, I felt like just going up and just tearing the whole place apart. But I knew that if I made one move, the guards would beat me up, that I wouldn't have accomplished anything. I would have been watched constantly after that. The only way of getting out is to never tell anybody you're going out. And if you're thinking it, you don't tell anybody. Fortunately, my wife and I made a pact that we would always talk to one another. And no one was allowed, husband or wife, to talk against the church at all. Jim Jones, anything. If they did, they were supposed to turn them in, and they did. It was just like Hitler, turn children against their parents and spouse against spouse. I'm not sure I answered the question, but if you'd like to ask any more, I'd be happy to help you.
No, I think you answered it.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Okay, Jeff.
What are you concerned about at this point?
Well, before I was told, like, when we signed
Jones had them in possession. We signed papers. I hate my children. We name our children. I molested my children when they were babies. I would like to see them dead. And then he would have these, he'd say, if you ever do anything to hurt me or this organization, I will give these to the authorities. You will be citizens in the city.
He's a very sick person.
I think.
He has so many followers and followers.
I'm sure that some were. I have no actual
It's not
proof
Miss
that it's
Speaker's
openly
been down to do anything
referred
he
to
says.
in PC meetings that we have. I sit down and we waited for Jones to
with the board,
came in after everyone
and
seated.
they
As he
held
walked
me
in,
down and
we
beat
were all
me.
required to stand
When I got up, I couldn't
and give
even
him a
walk.
salute. and
Why
wish
did
him
they
well.
beat
We honor
Well, I
you,
hugged
Father.
my girlfriend in the parking lot that had left the church.
After he sit
And
down,
they
he said,
figured-
and I will kill myself. Obviously, he wasn't going to harm himself. You know, he wants to go down in history as Lenin reincarnated. He's not going to take his own life. So we sat there stunned. I thinking that any moment I was going to plastic bubble that looked like blood and it rolled on my feet and I picked it up.
Knowing all this was going
and I said
on.
to myself, this is a
Fear, the fear tactics,
I'm aware.
and also the brainwashing that was done by a superior teacher, Jim Jones.
You know, and knew that it was.
How was it conducted, the brainwashing?
One woman that was not in on the team.
Constantly, we've had meetings sometimes 5 days a week, and we were always told that when the no-knock came out, they were saying, remember the Jews in Hitler, the concentration camp, that's why Hunter's Point is, so they can get all these black people in the area and bomb them. We were told that fascism, was going to take over, and that we were also told that we'd have to.
She fell on the floor. It was a loud blast. I said, hey, wait a minute.
We were told also that the KKK was going to destroy us. When the temple originated in Indianapolis, Indiana, the Ku Klux Klan would pick it out front of our church. So we knew that a lot of these things he was saying was very much reality, that there were a lot of racists. And so we knew that it could easily happen here. So we all gave our money, our property, everything we owned, so we could go to get out of the country. At first he said Canada. It was his promised land that he was going to free his people. So willingly we just got into it so we wouldn't be in concentration camps and murdered like the Jews. The brainwashing, oh my goodness, it's like Jim Jones, we called him Father, we called him God. Any pictures that we had of movie stars or whatever we took down, we put nothing but his pictures up around us. We we were told never to question him. We would witness people dropping dead, supposedly dropping dead. With a friend of mine that is in hiding now was poisoned, that we witnessed someone slip something in her drink because they said she stole some money. We had guards constantly around the church. We were constantly watched when we'd go to school or whatever. Hey, we were afraid to talk to our own parents, because when we did, we were turned in for being negative.
You were in the church for 8 years.
Yes.
When did he start talking about people killing themselves?
Around 1972.
How did he break that news?
Okay, he would say that, okay, now, if the people, the government officials or whatever, were to come in here and try to destroy us or take us or try to expose me or us, then we would kill ourselves. He also said that traitors, meaning myself, the defectors, were ever to leave, there would be 200 people left over to come and kill them. People would stand up and raise their hand, Father, I'll take care of them personally for you. These people at the time had guns on them, that constantly would carry guns.
And those that refused.
We were just, and then he said that we would kill ourselves while trying to defend ourselves, so no one would live to tell the story of the things that happened, that we would all kill ourselves. And the parents were told to sign a statement and just badgered that they would kill the kids. So I know for a fact these kids or these babies, my brothers and sisters there in that town, did not kill themselves. I feel that strongly because I was a part of that. I heard that constantly from him. It's an example for Mrs. Amos, who killed her 3 kids, slit their throats, and then herself.
At this point, I am past
You are concerned at this point about your relatives there.
Very much
I
so,
have
because
cried
as what was released on
You got it on?
Good evening. How do you begin to explain anything as macabre and bizarre as the weekend events surrounding the California religious cult known as the People's Temple in Guyana? Tonight, we'll try to make some sense of it. But first, the latest incredible facts. Authorities in Guyana confirmed late today that they had counted the bodies of 383 Americans at the temple's campsite in the jungle near the Venezuelan border. They'd apparently died in a mass murder and suicide. There were 163 women, 138 men, and 82 children. Some had been shot, many had been poisoned. The Guyana government say the victims had lined up to take poison brewed in a large vat. Among the dead was the charismatic leader of the cult, Jim Jones, his wife and one of his children, all poisoned. The mass deaths occurred shortly after members of the cult ambushed and killed California Congressman Leo Ryan on Saturday after a visit to investigate complaints by members. 4 other Americans died: NBC News correspondent Don Harris and NBC cameraman Robert Brown, San Francisco Examiner photographer Gregory Robinson, and Patricia Park, an American reported to be a member of the cult. Mark Lane, the American lawyer who was in Guyana to represent the cult, said members of the cult were talking about mass suicide as he fled the camp. He heard many bursts of automatic weapons fire and the voice of Jones over the camp loudspeaker shouting, "Mother, mother, mother, mother." Another 500 to 700 Americans thought to be at the camp are missing, but may have fled into the jungle. The United States government is sending military transport planes to collect the bodies of the suicide victims. Tonight, the background to the People's Temple cult and the events that led to the killings. Jim?
Robin, Congressman Leo Ryan's administrative assistant, Joe Holtzinger, was also one of his closest friends. They had known each other for more than 15 years. Mr. Holtzinger flew from Washington to San Francisco early this evening to be on hand when the congressman's body arrived from Guyana. I interviewed Mr. Holtzinger before he left. It was late this afternoon before confirmation came that the Reverend Jones, leader of the People's Temple cult, was dead. I asked Mr. Holtzinger to begin at the beginning.
What were the circumstances which first led to Congressman Ryan's interest in this group, the People's Temple?
A meeting he had about a year ago, or a year and a half ago to 2 years, he had the habit of having constituent meetings in people's homes. That is, meeting with them in their family situation to discuss their problems. And one of the people he met with was the Houston family in San Bruno, California. Sammy Houston is an AP photographer and was an old friend of Leo's. They knew each other for 25 years, and Leo knew him and trusted him, and when Sammy called for help, why, we went to see him. And this subject came up. Sammy's son, Bob Houston, had been a high school student of Leo's. Leo was a high school teacher, and so he knew the whole family. Bob Houston became a member of the People's Temple, and in his 20s or thereabouts, he had 2 small children and a wife, and he had joined the People's Temple. And the report we got from the family was that Bob had decided to leave the People's Temple. He had given them his salary, and he'd worked at the railroad yards in San Francisco, and given them his salary and I guess his possessions, and he believed completely in this program, this group.
Mm-hmm.
Then apparently one night or one day he told the people at the People's Temple, or whoever, Jones or whomever, that he was going to leave. He was thinking of leaving the temple. The next night he was found dead at the railroad yards. It was never determined whether it was an accident or homicide. There was no witnesses, and nobody knew what happened. But the Houston family were convinced it had been a violent act. The 2 children were taken to Jonestown when they moved to Jonestown.
Jonestown, that's the location in Guyana.
In Guyana.
Mm-hmm.
I guess from what I understand, the mother went with them originally, and then she got out or came away. And the mother and the grandparents tried to get these 2 children out, but they were getting Social Security payments for as orphans. And the money was going down to Guyana because that was their address, and apparently the People's Temple was cashing those checks. And it was the Houston family's belief that the reason for holding those 2 children there was to get that money. There were other considerations that they were afraid of might be happening there also to the children. Leo, in a rather emotional scene, promised Sam that he would do everything he could to get those grandchildren back, who were being held apparently against their will. That started it.
That was about a year and a half ago.
Yes. Then, because the Houston family knew other families who had similar problems, we started getting other contacts from relatives who had problems of the same type with the People's Temple.
What kind of problems?
Having relatives they felt being held against their will. And then we started meeting refugees, people who had gotten away from the People's Temple, who had been members there before, including people who had, one man had been a bodyguard of Jim Jones, another person who had been very close in the leadership. And these people had somehow gotten away and were very concerned, and they had some pretty drastic stories to tell.
Like what? What kind of stories?
Stories of physical intimidation, of psychological intimidation, of almost even of torture, and of...
Physical torture?
Yes. If somebody was being punished, they had physical punishment for people. It was a total society that was supposedly all for one and all for one, trust everybody. As it turned out, it became more and more an authoritarian society based on one man's mind, and that was the will of Jim Jones.
Jim Jones. And
so we heard these stories. We started documenting them over the last few months. We had been in touch with the State Department over the last year, but the State Department was convinced, based upon a few visits there, some of their personnel had gone out there, that it was benign, peaceful settlement, just an attempt at communal living, and that there was nothing wrong. And I can understand why they were convinced of that, because Jones did a tremendous job of mind-bending a lot of important and substantial people. It was, he was just an incredible personality.
But the congressman decided to go see for himself. Why? What prompted that, the trip itself?
Because there was no other way to find out the truth and to help the people who had relatives there who they said were being held against their will. There were lawsuits, successful in California courts. When they went to the Guyana courts to expedite those lawsuits or to use the Guyana law. There was never any decision. It seemed to be there was no way to break through that land so many hundreds of, thousands of miles away. And here you had all these people that were there, and Leo didn't know what was going on, and he had constituents, people in his district who desperately needed his help, and he had a very strong feeling about helping constituents. He thought his job was a representative, was a service one.
Did he go down there specifically just to see what the situation was, or did he go there with the idea of bringing some people out?
Both. He went down to investigate the situation, to find out what the truth was. He did not know when he went down which way it would go, whether it would be a combination. He had no idea. But he went down, as he often did on difficult situations, by a personal visit, to investigate and to find out what the circumstances were, to find out if American laws were being broken by use of IRS laws or Social Security laws. But he was determined, if he found people down there who were being held against their will, that he would bring them out.
Were there any prearrangements made with Jones and his people at the commune itself? In other words, did they know that the congressman and his party was coming?
Yes. On November the 1st, Leo sent a long wire to the Reverend Jones and a similar wire to Ambassador Burke. And it was a very conciliatory wire.
Ambassador Burke being whom?
The American ambassador in Georgetown, in Guyana.
In Guyana, all right.
And telling him his impending visit and saying that, in fact, he had heard conflicting stories, but he was down there to be helpful, and he knew that this had been Jones's life work. It was a very conciliatory letter. And so this was communicated, and he asked them to work through our embassy in Guyana and through to make all arrangements that were necessary. And he asked that he would hope to meet with Jones either in Georgetown or in Jonestown, and he would like to have their cooperation and look forward to meeting with them.
Did he get an answer?
The only answer he got two answers. One was through our embassy, stating that there were certain conditions that the People's Temple or Jones was putting on the visit. And the second answer was that they wanted him to work with Mark Lane, who had visited, an attorney who had visited Jonestown sometime before that. It was interesting because they didn't tell him to work through Charles Gary in San Francisco, who had been their general counsel. Mm-hmm. And why they chose Lane instead of Gary was a mystery to us and to Gary as well.
Did the State Department or anyone else tell you, the congressman, or anyone in your office that, hey, this trip could be dangerous, these people might be hostile towards you?
No. They never did. The only warnings of hostility came from myself and from Jackie Spear, the people who had been investigating it. His legal counsel went down with him and myself because we had conducted an investigation. We told him what we had, and he also knew from the People's Temple relatives and refugees, personally, of what they said the danger would be. As far as the State Department was concerned, the only indication we had from them was one of caution about housing conditions, that there was so many people going down might have a difficult time finding housing. They had no idea of the danger in the State Department.
Mm-hmm. But you say you did.
Well, that was because I had talked to people who had been down there and to the relatives, and that I was not sure. We had all heard the stories. I cautioned Leo about the danger because he was my close personal friend, and I was concerned for him. But he had been through this sort of thing before, through dangerous situations before. And he said, you can't let your decisions be based on fear. You have to put fear aside and do what you think is right. And he went there with that attitude.
Based on your knowledge, from taking the reports and the complaints that you had received in the office, does what happened in Guyana fit the pattern of Jones and his people?
Too completely. As Ron Jarvis of the San Francisco Chronicle said, everything that terrible had ever been said about the People's Temple turned out to be true. It was like Charles Manson's family magnified 1,000 times. It was incredible.
Well, there are reports today, as you know, that Jones himself may be alive. In other words, he was not one of the 300 or 400 people who were found dead at Jonesville or the camp there in Guyana. Does that surprise you at all,
No.
that he would not die with his people?
No, the man has been a master at using other people. But I don't think anybody of that caliber ever has intentions of doing himself in. I think he's just a manipulator of others.
Who are the others? Who are his followers? Is there any way to characterize these people in any general way?
I think so. I think they're generally people who are, if anything, a little over-emotional, kind people, people who are troubled, who have had hard times. And the one theme that runs throughout these people has been that they joined because they were looking for brotherhood. They were looking for love, for acceptance. They were looking for everything that was, you would call, kind and good. But they had a need for other people. And Jones played on that, promised them all that, and then said, trust me. And he went through the most bizarre ways of proving trust, such as training them to drink poison, just in case at one time it might be poison, of sharing all their possessions, perhaps sharing each other. It was sort of a total acceptance he preached, and these people wanted to believe. They wanted to find something in which to believe. And they believed in this total equality and total sharing. And that was what he used to build this insane empire.
The reports that these 300 to 400 people, some of them may have committed suicide by taking poison. Does that fit with your knowledge of this group?
I have my doubts about that. I know that he practiced them in taking poison. I'm not sure that it wasn't murder, that it wasn't mass murder. He had them bent their minds bent out of shape. But something tells me that somehow the people who died may well have been the people most likely to have wanted to leave.
As Jim said, that interview was recorded before the Guyanan authorities confirmed that Jones had been found dead among the other apparent suicide victims who had been poisoned. The People's Temple cult first came to wide public attention with investigative reports in New West magazine in California beginning in August 1977. The Reverend Jim Jones, who'd been appointed head of the San Francisco Housing Authority, resigned from that job and fled to Guyana shortly before the articles appeared. Phil Tracy is a contributing editor for the magazine and co-author of the articles on the People's Temple. Mr. Tracy, can you tell us a few basic things first? How many members did the temple have?
Well, I claim to have 20,000, but our investigations show that it was never more than 9,000.
And what kind of people were they in race, age, sex, economic conditions, basically?
Well, it covered every gamut, but majority of the congregation was black, and a substantial number, 50 to 60%, were elderly black people living on Social Security.
What was the appeal that recruited them?
Brotherhood. I think the congressman's aide that you just was on tape said it best. He reached out for people who were tired of simply chasing a buck and who wanted to work with other people and who wanted to make it a better world. And once he got them inside, he found out what their fears or their needs were, and he played on them. He was a master manipulator. One of these kinds of people that come around every once in a while and really sweep people up, and that's how he worked it.
What did they believe in of a religious nature?
Well, my investigation showed that that the religious element was quickly discarded once you got inside the temple. That Jones really wasn't a practicing Christian minister. He was a member of an ordained minister in the Disciples of Christ Church, but that within the temple itself he even openly preached against the Bible. Mm-hmm. So that it was more of an equality and a social revolution based on brotherhood was what he preached. But as the Congressman's aide again said a while ago, it quickly devolved into a militaristic society.
Your articles spoke of violence being used for discipline. What kind of violence?
Well, they used a large 4-foot wooden paddle, beating children, sometimes 100, 150 shots at a time. They also used a 4-foot a low-level cattle prod, which they called a one-eyed monster, and they would use that on children and on members who had violated some kind of minor rule, like talked out of turn or expressed undue affection for somebody, or maybe they'd eaten too much.
Giving them electric shocks with the cattle prod.
That's correct.
What kind of a man was Jones himself?
Well, I only got to meet him once, and he was very vain, very egocentric. He was very fluent. He made a convincing argument. At the time that I spoke to him, I didn't know very much myself about what was going on inside the temple. I didn't even have the rumors at that point. I just knew there was something wrong because he was an ordained minister, and yet he traveled around the city with 10 or 12 bodyguards, and his people were searched regularly before the services. So it looked strange.
Why did he move part of the cult to Guyana, part of the group to Guyana, and how many did he take?
He took about 1,000 to 1,200, as best we can determine. And from conversations with people who were inside the temple before they went to Guyana and left after he went to Guyana, they said that it was in part due to the publication of the stories in New West magazine, as well as the subsequent publication in both the San Francisco Chronicle and the San Francisco Examiner.
Uh-huh. From what you know, what might have explained what happened this weekend in Guyana, particularly the mass suicide?
Well, Jones had a trained SWAT teams, about 30 heavily armed black ghetto youth, and they were his main force, his main muscle in Guyana. I suspect they got out of control, and if Jones had wanted to kill the congressman and the rest of the reporters and not have it found out, and they had thought it through, they would have killed them in Port Kaitun or at the mission itself, and then tried to hide the bodies. And so the way it happened, it would seem to indicate it was the kind of thing where emotions got out of control, and he had heavily armed youth that just didn't know what they were doing.
Mr. Tracy, thank you. We'll come back. The People's Temple is one of many unusual religious groups which have sprung up in this country, particularly in California, in recent years. Irving Zaretsky is an anthropologist and lawyer who studied many of them. While attached to the University of Chicago Divinity School, Mr. Zaretsky published a book called Religious Movements in Contemporary America. Dr. Zaretsky, what does the People's Temple have in common with these other religious cults, and which ones?
Well, I think that it is very much like other contemporary religious movements, trying to give people a religious ideology, but effectively giving them, as Mr. Tracy said, secular services, self-help, an opportunity to improve their life, an opportunity to redefine themselves personally and collectively. I think it is like the Moon Church or Scientology or the Maharaji group or the Hare Krishna, in the sense that it is a total institution for some people.
Without saying that any of those groups necessarily follows these practices. Yes.
But analytically, they offer a total institution where individuals live all day long and all evening long in the group. They give them of the fruits of their labors, their salaries, their wages, and so on, sometimes their earthly possessions. They are disciplined to be able to get along within the group and to share with others the responsibilities of carrying the group forward. I think that they primarily appeal to individuals who have gone through a crisis very recently in their life. These are really individuals who are seekers that have gone from group to group in search of an elusive happiness or fulfillment or the realization of a personal goal.
Why is violence necessary for the disciplinary factor?
I'm not sure that violence is necessary for the disciplinary factor, but you do find the discipline is necessary if you're going to make any large heterogeneous group work together. Now, in the service of discipline, sometimes a variety of methods are used. Certainly, groups such as the People's Temple and other religious cults are vanguards of our society, and they rely on vogues and trends that already exist within our society. Violence is very much part of the American scene today. As recent reports have come out, the most violent place in America is the home, the nuclear family. To the extent that these groups substitute a social family for a biological family, it is not uncommon or unusual to find that violence exists in those circles. Now, as you know, recently, corporal punishment has been reintroduced in the schools. We are now a society that tends to value discipline as opposed to progressivism, a kind of reaction to the Dr. Spock upbringing. To the extent that that kind of discipline is called discipline as opposed to violence, and what happens in the People's Temple is called violence as opposed to discipline, we're in trouble. I think it's important to characterize all these phenomena by single sets of terms that accurately report what we find. And that is violence, whether in the home, in the school, or in a voluntary organization or a religious group, is violence. And I think we ought not to camouflage it under the category of discipline.
How do you explain the success of such groups today?
The success of such groups lies, I think, heavily with the followers. In other words, a person like Reverend Jones could not have been successful unless he had a coterie of individuals who were willing to submit themselves to such discipline. And we are a society that have offered a smorgasbord of opportunities for people's self-discovery and the discovery of others. And to the extent that people simply, their threshold becomes ever higher as a result of experimenting with various kinds of groups, they are willing to try the ultimate, which is pain and suffering in pursuit of joy and brotherhood.
Can I ask you a final question? Can you at all explain to yourself the now documented mass suicide, or at least that part of it that was suicide?
Yes, I look at it very much as the phenomena of when prophecy fails. That is to say, when individuals have followed a charismatic leader for a long period of time in hope that a certain prophecy will realize itself and personal happiness will in fact arrive, or utopia will be arrived at, and that prophecy does not come true. If an individual exists in his own societies in near proximity to family, kin, kith, friends, and so on, he's able to hold his belief in suspension and to veer away from that group and look for another group and have that prophecy be realized at a later time. When you're left in an alien society, out of touch with anything that is familiar to you and no support structure to bolster you, then you follow, in fact, the lead of others. And I'm sure that this kind of a suicide, to the extent that it was a suicide, and I'm not convinced of that, would have fallen in that tradition, that no support structures at the time when prophecy fails leads to a phenomenon of follow the leader.
Thank you. Jim?
Mr. Tracy, first to you. What about the members of the People's Temple who are still alive, either in Guyana or in San Francisco? Are they liable to commit more violence?
I don't believe so. I think that most of the Temple members, who were what you would call hardcore fanatical followers of the Reverend Jones, left in the summer of 1977, and that the people left here in San Francisco were people who unwilling to go to Guyana. And as a result of that, I don't think that those that are here now are going to take their lives here in the city or in the rest of California.
Well, there were reports, as I'm sure you've heard, unconfirmed at this point, that people in the San Francisco area and California who may have criticized the cult in the past, that some of the still living members might try to take retribution. There was police protection for them and that sort of thing. You think that they're liable to do anything like that now?
That's a possibility. That's a distinct possibility. The past history of dealing with this temple, when these former members, each one of them had dozens of threatening letters and just numerous tales about threatening telephone calls and even visits to their home after they left the temple. Yeah. I myself and the editors at New West also received death threats during the period when we were trying to conduct our investigation. And on light of this morning, it certainly wouldn't want to assume that it's not possible.
Yeah. Dr. Zaretsky, let me ask you a question. Does a group like this normally disintegrate once its charismatic leader, a person like Jones, dies or leaves the scene?
Well, they don't have to disintegrate. To the extent that schismatic movements were afoot before his death, a certain small coterie of individuals can follow one of his main cadre personnel and form a substitute group. However, it's quite likely, and perhaps more likely, that these groups will simply search out for themselves new or existing groups in the Bay Area and begin to follow them for the same purposes that they joined the People's Temple to begin with.
Does that add up that way to you, Mr. Tracy, that these people, without Jones, will just kind of spread to the winds to other groups, or do you think the People's Temple will continue to exist without Jones?
I think the professor's right. I think that they will spread to other groups if they get involved at all. Possibly they may have decided not to ever get involved with another group like this again.
All right. Gentlemen, thank you. All right, finally, a personal note. I knew Don Harris, the NBC News correspondent who died in Guyana. I knew him well. He and I worked together, but for different news organizations in Texas in the early 70s. He was anchoring a local newscast at the time, and he hated everything about it except the money. One day over lunch, he told me, "No more, I can't stand it," sitting there like a grinning ninny, all prim and proper, reading stories somebody else has written, stories I don't know anything about because I wasn't there myself. I'm a reporter. I want to be out there where the news is, not back in some studio trading inane jokes with the weatherman and the sports guy. That was Don Harris, a good friend, a good reporter. Robin?
That's all for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow night. I'm Robert McNeil. Good night.